That freezing December night in 1997, a tragic scene unfolded within Chris Farley's Chicago flat. The beloved comedian was discovered cold after a chaotic night, but he hadn't been solo. A companion witnessed his final moments, leaving behind a mystery that still lingers today. While the coroner cited a lethal cocktail of coke and morphine, many suspect the full truth remains hidden. If you scrutinize the timeline, the details and the people present simply don't align. How did such a brilliant comedic force reach this breaking point? Was this heartbreaking conclusion unavoidable from the start? This is the unfiltered reality of Chris Farley. Born on February 15, 1964, Farley was raised in Maple Bluff, Wisconsin, attending local Catholic schools. He was widely considered a polite, devout youth who never skipped Sunday service. That wholesome exterior masked a much more difficult upbringing. His physical size made him a constant target for cruel schoolyard taunts. Peers bombarded him with weight-related insults, yet he refused to crumble. Instead, he weaponized comedy as a shield against the pain. Eliciting laughter became his primary method for reclaiming his power. Over time, that funny persona became his entire identity. Don't mistake his humor for weakness, though. At Marquette University, he excelled in rugby, where his bulk actually gave him a competitive edge. He was a powerhouse on the pitch before graduating with his theater and communications degrees. That specific academic path would eventually catapult him toward a future he never envisioned. Post-college, he briefly joined his father's oil firm, but quickly realized he wasn't cut out for it. The spotlight pulled him back, leading him to Madison's Arc Improv before he relocated to the comedic hub of Chicago. He refined his craft at Improv Olympic before joining the ranks at Second City, a legendary launchpad for comedic icons. Like every other hopeful on that stage, Farley aimed to impress Lorne Michaels of Saturday Night Live. By 1990, that dream finally materialized. Making the move to Manhattan, he took center stage on the world's biggest comedy platform. His most legendary creation was Matt Foley, the screaming motivational speaker living in a riverside van. When he first performed the bit alongside David Spade and Christina Applegate, nobody anticipated the cultural phenomenon it would become. During the live broadcast, Spade and Applegate struggled to keep straight faces, while a sweaty, manic Farley dominated the scene. Without warning, he went airborne and pulverized the coffee table right in front of them. Their shocked expressions were totally authentic, as the stunt was unscripted and the audience went wild. Foley became an overnight sensation, as did Farley himself. Interestingly, the character's name was initially random until Farley's actual friend, Matt Foley, attended a performance. That name became permanent. In a strange twist, the real Matt Foley, his old college rugby buddy, actually became a Catholic priest. The character's fame peaked in 1994 when the Wisconsin Badgers recruited Farley to perform for the team before the Rose Bowl. He delivered a high-energy performance, and the team actually secured the championship. It was as if his chaotic spirit acted as a lucky charm. On camera, Foley's intense caffeine habit was a running gag involving endless espresso and stimulant pills. Behind the scenes, however, it wasn't much of a performance. Farley relied heavily on stimulants to maintain his explosive energy levels. While shooting Billy Madison, he reportedly slammed 6 espresso shots before a single scene. While it fueled his performance, it hinted at a darker dependency. His range extended far beyond a single character. On SNL, he was famous for bombastic impressions of figures like Roger Ebert. However, his Tom Arnold portrayal would eventually cause some friction. Their encounter on the Conehead set was incredibly awkward. Soon after, Farley landed a major film role with David Spade, but Tommy Boy was a brutal production. Both actors were still juggling weekly SNL episodes, forcing them to fly between New York and Toronto constantly. This grueling pace eventually pushed them to their limits. Everything seemed stable until Spade went out with Rob Lowe while a sick Farley stayed behind. When Farley found out, he felt completely betrayed. He gave Spade the cold shoulder the next day, only speaking to icily interrogate him about Rob Lowe. That resentment soon boiled over into physical violence. Driven by jealousy, Farley marched over to a lunching Spade and stomped directly on his hand, crushing his sandwich in the process. That was the final straw. Spade retaliated with a soda can, sparking a brawl that sent him tumbling down some stairs. Strangely, there was a secret behind the casting. Originally, the movie was supposed to feature Rob Lowe as the co-star. However, Lorne Michaels insisted that the Farley-Spade chemistry was far superior. Michaels was right. Their bond became the film's foundation. After the fight, both retreated to their trailers, though a fuming Farley still managed to tackle the assistant director. While they had several blow-ups, the pair always found a way to reconcile. Yet, these outbursts were far from accidental. These were clear indicators of a deeper internal struggle. During Tommy Boy, Farley was attempting to stay sober, which likely left him emotionally volatile. Well, he was mostly clean. Much like his Farley character, he stayed awake by consuming astronomical amounts of coffee. Some claim he hit 27 cappuccinos in a single day. Despite his exhaustion, he flatly refused to use any stunt performers. Every brutal wipeout and crash you see on screen was actually him. That painful faceplant during the fraternity scene, 100% authentic. He had a bizarre ability to bounce back from those hits instantly. Still, the physical stunts weren't nearly as taxing as his social life. Away from the cameras, he was surprisingly bashful, especially around his on-screen love interest, Julie Warner. He was so timid that she initially thought he was joking. Eventually, she realized he was actually nursing a massive crush. She eventually pulled him into her trailer, refusing to let him leave until he finally felt comfortable enough to talk normally. That heart-to-heart reportedly lasted 4 hours. Shortly after, he hit a wall trying to produce tears on command for a dramatic scene. Stuck in a heavy scene on a vessel, he couldn't find the tears, so he literally jabbed his own eyeball to trigger a sob. That worked until chaos erupted when the film was ruined, and with the water turning to ice, they had to redo everything instantly. Farley was forced to endure that agonizing routine one more time. Against the odds, Tommy Boy blew up, launching him into the A-list and flooding his desk with new offers. His only real wish was to get back on set with director Peter Siegel. There was just one hitch, as Siegel kept turning him down, claiming the material was simply subpar. Chris didn't buy that excuse, and this disconnect would eventually ignite a fight he never saw coming. Deep down, he was incredibly fragile, making every rejection feel like a punch to the gut. When Siegel passed on his pitches, Farley couldn't see it as a simple professional choice. He internalized the rejection, fearing his friend had turned on him, which forced the director to pen a 7-page note just to prove their bond was solid. Meanwhile, back at his old stomping grounds, he had found his true tribe. Hanging with Rock, Sandler, and Meadows, they were comedy gold on camera but total nightmares behind it. Their chaotic lifestyle earned them a notorious reputation as the bad boys of Saturday Night Live. That label was well earned, as things got wild once the camera stopped, with him and Sandler making harassing phone calls from the office at midnight. Farley would go even further, frequently flashing his backside to strangers from the window of a moving limousine. Sometimes the jokes turned dangerous and gross, like when he hung out of a skyscraper window to expose himself and use the city below as a toilet. It was even too much for his wild friends. The scariest moment happened at a skyscraper bash when a concerned friend suggested he take a break from the bottle. Instead of cooling off, he lost it and sprinted right at her. He missed her, but slammed into a glass pane with a 15-story drop on the other side. By some miracle, the window held firm despite the impact. He survived that near-death plunge, but it was a terrifyingly slim margin that almost cost him everything. That brush with death sent him to the hospital with a massive gash from his wrist all the way to his elbow. Though he was wasted, the wound was so gnarly that the staff gave him heavy narcotics anyway. Mixing booze with pills led to a dark scene where he reportedly began clawing at his own open injury. It was a gruesome turning point that kicked off a long, toxic obsession with prescription drugs. These reckless episodes were mounting until they finally began to tank his career. By 1995, the network had reached its breaking point, and both he and Sandler were booted from the cast. Executives tried to spin it as a graceful exit, but the truth was they were canned. Years later, Sandler admitted the split was anything but friendly. He had to navigate a world without his home base, but luckily, his recent hit movie kept the phone ringing. The studio locked him in for another buddy comedy with David Spade called Black Sheep, though he wasn't exactly excited about it. His heart was actually set on a grittier project at another studio titled The Cable Guy. He had a valid gripe, as Paramount was rushing their movie into production without even having a script, just to trap him before his deal expired. The whole thing was a disaster he wanted to escape, but then Jim Carrey swooped in for his dream role. At that time, nobody could compete with Carrey's star power. The part went to the bigger star along with a $20 million payday, leaving Chris to settle for less than $1 million on his current film. To add insult to injury, he and Spade couldn't even get the director they wanted. Despite that emotional note he had sent earlier, Siegel walked away from the duo yet again. Claiming their last project left them totally burnt out, they hit a wall. Even hiring a fresh director backfired, introducing a mess of fresh headaches instead of fixing the old ones. Picking the director for Black Sheep felt like a total slam dunk. Penelope Spheris was riding high after the massive success of Wayne's World, and the hype was through the roof. Friction ignited almost instantly on set. David Spade voiced concerns about being sidelined in favor of Chris Farley. To be fair, his gripes were actually pretty spot on. Spheris figured Farley was the real comedic powerhouse, so she centered the entire production around him. Spade expected his buddy to have his back, Yet Farley was chasing a different goal entirely. Midway through production, he suddenly pivoted, craving the respect of a dramatic actor. This shift cut down his bits with Spade to make room for serious scenes alongside Tim Matheson. While Spade was blindsided, Farley viewed it as career growth. The situation turned toxic when Spade fought for more scenes. Farley dropped a bombshell, offering cold cash just to get his co-star off the set. It was a relationship-ending insult, and things were only getting uglier behind the scenes. During their last film, David had fallen for a woman named Laurie Bagley, but once he introduced her to his partner, things took a turn. Chris started dating her behind his back, and the discovery of that secret romance was devastating. That backstab stung far worse than any production nightmare. Although he wasn't feeling the script, Farley still poured his soul into the performance. He did all his own stunts as usual, which meant he actually took those brutal tumbles down the mountain himself. As a personal nod, he even got his brothers, Kevin and John, cast as guards in the flick. When a scene required real tears, he asked his brother John to help him get into the right headspace. John spun a fake story about their dad being abandoned, which caused him to sob uncontrollably and left him shaken long after the cameras stopped. This constant mixing of his real pain and his work was clearly starting to wear him down. The movie flopped compared to their first hit, and the disappointment drove him back to the bottle after a 6-month streak of being clean. One drink spiraled into a total relapse and a return to treatment, leaving him far more hesitant about his next project, Beverly Hills Ninja. He refused to sign on unless they met one specific demand. He needed his best pal Chris Rock right there beside him. Having launched their careers on Saturday Night Live together, Chris truly felt safe with him. Working with Rock resulted in some of the most joyful days he ever had on a movie set. Still, even that support system could not keep his demons at bay. Once the camera stopped rolling, he spiraled right back into his old habits. By the time he showed up for extra takes, the physical decline was heartbreakingly obvious. He appeared completely drained, looking like a total stranger to the crew. Everyone behind the scenes worked overtime, trying to recreate the high-octane energy he displayed in earlier footage. For his following project, Almost Heroes, he teamed up with Matthew Perry. Unfortunately, his health was visibly deteriorating throughout the entire production. Reviewers panned the film, making it a bittersweet final bow for his career as a leading man. Meanwhile, Norm Macdonald was already carving out a spot for him in Dirty Work before the pages were even done. Nobody knew it then, but that minor cameo would be one of his final acts. Then there is the what-if story that still breaks the hearts of his followers today. He was the first choice to voice Shrek, a role that eventually became a cultural phenomenon. He had already laid down several tracks, giving the Green Ogre a much more vulnerable and sensitive personality. Producers even toyed with the idea of casting David Spade as the donkey to recreate their iconic chemistry. That specific cut of the movie never saw the light of day as his personal life began to fall apart. Things got so dire that people were actually tailing him to ensure his safety. Those closest to him sensed the clock was ticking and feared the worst was imminent. The Shrek production crew was so terrified of a potential breakdown that they allegedly hired a shadow to watch his every move. Unfortunately, that dread was entirely justified. He never finished the recordings, which led to Mike Myers stepping into the iconic role. Despite his messy exit from Saturday Night Live, the network brought him back to host on October 25, 1997. During the monologue, Tim Meadows poked fun at his reputation by claiming he had finally cleaned up his act. The audience roared with laughter, though the reality was far more tragic. He made a genuine effort to stay sober throughout early December, even seeking comfort in church services. However, by December 14th, he lost control once more. Following a wild night out, he returned home with a hired companion. The events that followed remain the most chilling chapter of his entire biography. The woman eventually confessed to stealing his watch and snapping photos while he was in a vulnerable state. She ignored his final words, "Don't leave me," before walking away forever. Only 2 months after his hosting gig, his brother discovered his body. An overdose took his life, leaving the entire entertainment industry in a state of absolute shock. His memorial service was filled with comedy legends like Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, and Phil Hartman. Yet, one person's absence was impossible to ignore. David Spade was nowhere to be found. While rumors of a feud circulated, Spade later admitted he was simply too broken to say goodbye. The grief was overwhelming. For many, this tragedy felt like a dark encore of John Belushi's demise, another explosive talent gone way before his time. The similarities were so striking that Bill Murray found the whole situation unbearable to witness. During the production of Black Sheep, he dropped a chilling hint about his mindset. He confessed to his director that he worshipped Belushi's legacy, including the dark parts. He explicitly stated he hoped to go out exactly like his hero did. Back then, most people probably just brushed it off as a sick joke. Looking back, those words carry a heavy weight. He was obsessed with the idea that Belushi's substance abuse was the secret ingredient to his comedic genius. That dangerous notion took root in his mind. He eventually confessed that his drug use was a misguided attempt to mirror his idol's path. To his credit, he did struggle against it. During his final 2 years, he sought professional help 17 different times. He tried everything from traditional rehab to support groups and health clinics. Yet, nothing could break the cycle for one specific reason. He was convinced that his success depended on being the loud, heavy, and chaotic guy. He was absolutely terrified that getting healthy would make him lose his funny bone. Behind every joke was the nagging worry that sobriety would end his career. To make matters worse, some people in the industry were incredibly cruel. Critic Gene Siskel was particularly brutal, scoffing at any attempt to put him in the same league as Belushi or John Candy. Siskel was relentless, calling him a hack, and famously walking out in the middle of one of his screenings. By the time his last movie hit theaters, his inner circle had a single plea. They begged for Siskel to just stay away and keep his opinions to himself. After all the pain he endured, his fans just could not stomach another nasty review of a man who was no longer here.